What if the history we know is only a sliver of the truth? In every corner of the world, buried beneath layers of soil and time, lie artifacts that don't belong. Objects so advanced, so anachronistic, they challenge the entire timeline of human achievement. They are relics that whisper of knowledge we shouldn't possess, technologies that defy the known arc of invention, metals that reshape themselves, crystals that seem to think, and machines older than recorded history. This is not a journey into fantasy. It's a meditation on memory, not just the memory we carry, but the memory that is stored in matter itself. It began, for many, in the summer of 1947. A crash in the desert outside Roswell, New Mexico. The official story was quick, dismissive. A weather balloon. But the fragments collected told a different tale. Pieces that could not be bent, burned, or broken. Metal that would return to its shape no matter how it was crushed. And under microscopic analysis decades later, these fragments revealed isotopic fingerprints that didn't match anything from Earth. Scientists who handled the material were bewildered, not just because of what it was, but because of what it meant. Metallurgy far beyond our own. Structures so precise they could only have been built molecule by molecule. The material responded to electricity, generated weak electromagnetic fields, and exhibited signs of programmable matter, an idea we're only beginning to understand today. And still, the core properties remain unexplained. That was just the beginning. In the decades that followed, similar impossibilities surfaced. Clay jars in Iraq, for example, from over 2,000 years ago, capable of producing electrical currents for months. Not primitive batteries, but devices bearing microscopic wiring and advanced alloys. When connected together, they could power systems unknown to antiquity, perhaps part of a network, long buried and long forgotten. From beneath the sea off the coast of Greece came another puzzle. A bronze mechanism, its gears delicately meshed, long thought to be an ancient astronomical calculator. But under the lens of modern particle physics, the truth was even stranger. Embedded within its gears were quantum structures, evidence of parallel processing, of entanglement, a device that could calculate not just the past, but the future, as if ancient hands had grasped the foundations of quantum theory millennia early. And these are only three of many. Each chapter of this story will center on a single artifact, one enigma among many. A skull carved with microscopic precision, a disc etched with spirals of code, a metal wedge that predates the material itself, perfect stone spheres that hum when struck, placed to mirror constellations visible only from space. Landing strips visible from the sky, built long before flight. Screws embedded in stone older than multicellular life. A sphere 2.8 billion years old that heals itself and moves, alone in a glass case. We'll examine them one by one, not to reach conclusions, but to ask better questions. What do they say about who we are, about how we remember, how we forget, and what we are not yet ready to see? Each of these objects has been sealed away, labeled classified, hidden behind thick walls and thicker silence. But even in silence, they speak. And if we listen closely, we might hear more than forgotten history. We might hear echoes of intelligence, not our own. This is not a tale of conspiracy. It is a meditation on the unknown. Because sometimes, to understand where we're going, we have to first understand what we've chosen to forget. Welcome to the Hidden Archive, a journey through the impossible. And perhaps a glimpse of the truth beneath the stories we've told ourselves. It started with metal that remembered. In the barren desert near Roswell, New Mexico, 1947, a crash site would ignite generations of speculation. Locals reported strange debris, silvery, impossibly light, oddly flexible. But when touched or crushed, it would snap back to its original shape. Soldiers collected the wreckage under tight security. Officially, it was a downed weather balloon. Unofficially, it was something else entirely. Dr. Jesse Marcel, a military intelligence officer, was among the first to examine the fragments. He described material thinner than foil, yet stronger than steel, impossible to cut or burn. More disturbing was its behavior. It seemed to respond to intention. Fold it, twist it, crush it, and it would unfold itself, undamaged, unchanged. It was called memory metal. At Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, hidden from public scrutiny, metallurgists examined its structure. What they found defied explanation. The metal contained isotopic ratios not found on Earth. Its internal organization suggested atomic-scale precision, arranged not by chance or smelting, but by some form of molecular manufacturing we wouldn't understand until nanotechnology emerged decades later. More than its physical strength, the metal exhibited strange electromagnetic behavior. Without any power source, it generated faint but stable fields. It remained the same temperature regardless of its environment, as though it resisted thermodynamic norms. Under electric current, its properties would change: flexibility, conductivity, even color. As if it were a machine waiting for instructions. Researchers whispered of programmable matter, of materials that could shift form and function in real time, tailored to the needs of the moment. This wasn't science fiction. It was now in a lab, humming softly beneath thick glass and silent alarms. Some say this discovery accelerated our own advancement, that modern composite materials, metamaterials, even breakthroughs in stealth and aerospace engineering owe their origin to the reverse engineering of this alien alloy. But the most profound properties, the self-repairing structure, the sentient responsiveness, remain elusive, unreproducible. For over 75 years, the memory metal has been kept from the world, locked away behind layers of clearance and denial. Few scientists are permitted access, fewer still speak of it. But those who have describe the same feeling, that they are not examining an object, but a message written in the language of atoms, left behind like a breadcrumb, asking us not just how, but why. Why was it here? If this technology predates our own by centuries or millennia, then it couldn't have come from us. And if it came from elsewhere, from some intelligence beyond our world, then the crash was no accident. It was an encounter, a moment of unintended contact, or perhaps a deliberate handoff, a quiet passing of knowledge. Roswell has become myth, cliché even. But strip away the noise, the conspiracies, the Hollywood scripts, and what remains is metal that should not exist. An object that remembers its shape, its form, and maybe its purpose. We are left not with answers, but with a fragment, a sliver of something greater, a reminder that the history of our technology may have been interrupted by a gift or a warning. And the deeper question lingers: if metal can remember, what have we forgotten? In the dry soil of ancient Mesopotamia, buried beneath centuries of dust and forgotten empires, lay a mystery no history book could explain. In 1936, near Baghdad, German archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig unearthed a curious artifact, an unassuming terracotta jar. Inside was a copper cylinder, and within that an iron rod. It looked primitive, almost accidental. But when liquid was poured into the jar, it produced a faint electrical current, a battery. 2,000 years before the invention of the voltaic cell. At first it was dismissed, a quirk, a fluke of ancient craftsmanship. But further analysis, quietly funded, quietly classified, revealed something astonishing. When assembled correctly, the so-called Baghdad battery produced not just a spark, but a sustained electrical current. It could run for months. When several were connected in series, their combined output mirrored modern electrical systems. This was no primitive prototype. It was functional, refined, intentional. Researchers were stunned. Among them, Dr. Ara Grecht at the Hildenheim Museum, who conducted private experiments away from public scrutiny. What he discovered defied explanation. The copper and iron elements within the jars were connected by microscopic wires, wires invisible to the naked eye, created with a precision that modern tools could barely replicate. Even more troubling, the metals showed no signs of corrosion despite centuries underground. Their composition included rare earth elements not native to the region, and when subjected to deep chemical analysis, the materials bore isotopic signatures inconsistent with any known Earth deposit. Then came the real revelation. Excavations uncovered a network, chambers connected by long-forgotten tunnels. Inside were other jars, similar in design. Traces of copper wiring embedded in stone. The scale suggested something larger than a few experimental devices. This was not an isolated invention. It was infrastructure, a power grid buried for 2,000 years. The implications were staggering. Electrical engineering as a discipline didn't emerge until the 18th century. Yet here it was, hidden in plain sight, humming beneath layers of time and disbelief. How could a civilization possess such knowledge, and why had it disappeared? One theory emerged, quietly whispered among those allowed to study the artifacts. Perhaps the knowledge wasn't invented, but inherited, passed down, or passed on. The Baghdad batteries weren't just relics, they were remnants, pieces of a lost system, fragments of a deeper current that once ran through the ancient world. But most unsettling was the silence that followed. After initial studies, the batteries were removed from public display, shuffled into classified collections, access restricted, files sealed, as if the implications were too great to confront. Not just because they challenged our sense of history, but because they suggested we were not the first to understand the spark. Electricity, what we now see as the heartbeat of modern life, may have pulsed through forgotten hands long before us. And so the jars sit unseen behind concrete and code, waiting. And perhaps the real question isn't how they worked or who built them, but why the light was extinguished, and who decided we weren't ready to see it again. Beneath the waves off the coast of Greece, resting in the shattered remains of an ancient shipwreck, a device lay dormant for nearly 2,000 years. The world came to know it as the Antikythera mechanism, a tangle of bronze gears and corroded fragments. At first, it seemed like a marvel of mechanical ingenuity, an ancient calendar, an astronomical calculator. But as deeper examinations unfolded, the device began to betray secrets far beyond the capabilities of its age. Modern X-ray tomography peeled back its layers, revealing over 100 gears, precisely crafted and impossibly small. The gear ratios didn't align with the sun and moon alone. They encoded patterns found in quantum mechanics. Constants we didn't discover until the 20th century appeared embedded in bronze. Some gears matched planetary cycles with uncanny accuracy, but others reflected mathematical relationships we still don't fully understand. And then came the most impossible revelation. Hidden within the framework were crystalline structures, too small to be seen without advanced magnification. They weren't decorative, they were functional. Microscopic nodes capable of superposition, allowing for multiple simultaneous states. In essence, quantum processors housed within a device thought to be carved by hand in 100 BCE. Dr. Tony Free and his team at University College London, working under restricted clearance, discovered something even stranger. When one component was moved, others responded instantly, regardless of their distance within the machine. A clear sign of entanglement. Communication not bound by proximity. It behaved not just like a mechanical computer, but like a quantum one. The implications were staggering. Here was a device from antiquity that functioned on principles we associate with modern supercomputers. Principles believed impossible to engineer without clean rooms, lasers, and atomic precision. More than that, it could make predictions. Accurate ones: solar eclipses, planetary alignments, asteroid paths, some only discovered by modern astronomy within the past few decades. It wasn't just simulating the cosmos, it was modeling time. Carbon dating complicated the story further. Organic residue on the gears dated to the 1st century BCE. But isotopic analysis of embedded materials pointed to components only decades old. Time, it seemed, flowed unevenly through this artifact. It existed in contradiction, part ancient, part impossibly recent. This paradox raised a haunting possibility, that the device itself transcended time. Some theorized it had been altered, others that it had never been fully understood even by those who created it, that it was, perhaps, inherited. A relic passed down from a knowledge far older than the ship that carried it, or from hands not entirely human. Publicly, the Antikythera mechanism remains an archaeological curiosity, celebrated for its ingenuity, marveled at in museums. Privately, it remains under constant study, classified well above nuclear secrets, not because of what it was, but because of what it could do. It suggested a kind of intelligence that combined mechanical engineering with quantum design, a synthesis we have not yet achieved. And so this ancient object, born in the age of bronze and empire, may not be ancient at all. It may be a messenger, a question cast into time like a bottle into the sea. What if the past wasn't behind us, but encoded in layers we've yet to decode? What if we've mistaken inheritance for invention? And what other devices disguised as relics have we already misunderstood? In the dense jungle of Belize, under the roots of a collapsed Mayan temple, a skull waited in silence. Carved from a single block of pure quartz crystal, the Mitchell-Hedges skull gleamed with anatomical precision. Its surfaces were impossibly smooth. Its jaw was hinged. Under scrutiny, there were no tool marks, no signs of chisel, abrasion, or carving. Experts marveled. How had an ancient civilization, without diamond tools, or high-speed rotary equipment, shaped crystals so flawlessly? But the true mystery wasn't just in the craftsmanship, it was in the function. Inside the skull, researchers discovered microscopic optical pathways, tiny channels etched into the quartz that refracted and focused light like a lens. When beams passed through at specific angles, the crystal produced radiant projections, patterns, star maps, and strange fleeting images. It was not just sculpture, it was a device. Dr. Frank Dorland, working in secrecy at Hewlett-Packard Laboratories, found something even more impossible: embedded fiber optic networks, engineered within the crystal lattice itself. These weren't cracks or veins. They were structured, deliberate, capable of transmitting information through light. And then a breakthrough: resonance. When exposed to electromagnetic fields, the skull emitted frequencies. When two other crystal skulls found continents away were subjected to the same treatment, they responded in kind. Identical pulses, matching wavelengths, separated by thousands of miles, yet behaving as one. The phenomenon resembled quantum entanglement, only at a macroscopic scale. Was this sculpture part of a network? Artifacts once considered legend, a handful of other crystal skulls scattered across the globe, began to reveal similar traits. When brought together, they projected complex images, holographic constellations of deep space, including star systems unknown to contemporary astronomy. Some maps depicted galaxies so distant their light had only recently reached Earth. Where had this knowledge come from? The material itself held more clues. Spectrographic analysis found trace elements within the quartz that don't naturally occur on Earth. The isotopic fingerprints matched those predicted for materials formed in the hearts of neutron stars. In other words, this crystal may have originated in the aftermath of stellar collapse. But perhaps most unsettling of all was the skull's interaction with human consciousness. Subjects reported different visual patterns, dependent on emotional state or mental focus. Researchers began to suspect that the device was responsive, not just to light or frequency, but to thought, to intention, to awareness. Theories emerged. Perhaps these skulls were communication nodes, not machines in the mechanical sense, but hybrid artifacts, interfaces between mind and matter. A bridge between consciousness and the cosmos. Today, the crystal skulls remain locked away, studied under extreme security. Not because they threaten governments or reveal forbidden histories, but because they may open a door we don't yet know how to close. If these skulls are part of a network, then who built it? And why? Were they relics of a forgotten terrestrial science? Gifts from another world? Or something older still? Remnants of a civilization not bound by geography, but by shared thought. As we gaze into the hollow eyes of quartz, we're not just looking at ancient art, we're staring into a mirror of possibility. And the reflection staring back asks, what is the shape of intelligence when it is carved not in clay or metal, but in light? High in the mountains along the border of China and Tibet, in caves eroded by wind and time, hundreds of stone discs lay scattered like ancient messages forgotten by the earth. They were first discovered in 1938, round granite stones, each about 2 feet across, with a small hole in the center and spiral grooves etched across the surface. To the naked eye, they looked like oversized records, burial markers perhaps, ritual objects. But the grooves weren't random. They were writing. Microscopic writing. Soviet linguist Dr. Sergei Ledov spent years under classified conditions attempting to translate the inscriptions. What he found defied reason. The spiral text detailed information on space travel, galactic coordinates, propulsion systems. Technical diagrams, etched so finely they required magnification to read, depicted spacecraft that used magnetic fields for lift and propulsion. Concepts humanity wouldn't explore until the dawn of the space age. The Dropa stones, as they came to be called, were not ceremonial. They were a database. One disk described methods for altering genetic code, protocols for adapting organisms to different planetary environments. Another outlined navigation principles that accounted for gravitational curvature and stellar drift. Each stone was a chapter in a manual of advanced knowledge created by hands long lost to time. And yet these artifacts were dated to over 12,000 years ago, well before the rise of agriculture, cities, or written language. There were no civilizations then, at least none that we remember. How could such precise information on genetics, physics, spaceflight be carved into stone before the wheel had even been invented? The answer might lie not in the message, but in the medium. Testing revealed the stones generated weak magnetic fields. When exposed to electricity, they emitted low-frequency radio signals. They weren't just carved, they were encoded. The granite itself acted as a storage medium, as if the stones were built to transmit data using principles of electromagnetic storage thousands of years ahead of their time. More anomalies emerged. The stone's material included trace elements not found in surrounding geology. Some components suggested extraterrestrial origin, minerals consistent with asteroid impact deposits or cometary debris. Others showed isotopic signatures that don't exist anywhere in Earth's crust. And then there was the carving itself. Some characters were smaller than a human hair, yet perfectly formed, consistent, geometrically flawless. Not even modern CNC machines can etch granite with that level of micro-precision without cracking the stone. Whoever created the Dropa stones possessed knowledge of materials science, genetics, astrophysics, and magnetism far beyond any ancient culture we know. Yet they left no cities, no temples, only discs in remote caves waiting for someone to understand. They told a story, one of arrival, of adaptation, of communication. But more hauntingly, they also spoke of departure. Perhaps these were not gifts left behind, but records abandoned. A final data dump before vanishing from our skies, or from our memory. Today, most of the stones are locked away in Chinese military archives. Those that remain in museums are misidentified, misdated, misfiled. But they speak all the same, not with words, but with a silent hum beneath the surface, a whisper written in stone. As if asking, what happens when history forgets the truth? But the rock remembers. Deep in the jungles of Costa Rica, hidden beneath layers of soil and centuries of overgrowth, lie perfect spheres of stone, hundreds of them scattered across the landscape like cosmic breadcrumbs. They vary in size, from mere inches to over 6 feet in diameter. Some rest in clusters, others stand alone. But all share one impossible trait: geometric perfection. Measured with modern instruments, the largest spheres deviate by less than 2 millimeters from a true sphere, a precision that rivals or even exceeds today's best manufacturing standards. Yet these stones predate industrial tools. They were created by hands that had never known iron, never smelted steel. The first reports emerged in the 1930s when workers clearing banana plantations stumbled upon the spheres. Initially dismissed as curiosities or symbols of lost rituals, they soon drew the attention of scientists. One of them, Dr. Samuel Loth from MIT, conducted classified studies in the 1970s. His findings were sealed for decades. Because the spheres were more than ornamental. Ground-penetrating radar revealed that many of them contained inner cores, structured arrangements of different stones, carefully placed and sealed inside. These weren't just carved, they were engineered. Some even produced ultrasonic vibrations when struck, creating resonance patterns that suggested they functioned as acoustic devices, like tuning forks built from rock. Even stranger, their placement followed celestial patterns. Mapped across Costa Rica, the spheres align with star constellations, constellations visible only from orbit. They trace the sky as seen from above the atmosphere, not from a mountaintop, not from a pyramid, from space. Petrographic analysis showed another mystery. The stone used, granodiorite, doesn't occur naturally near the sites where the spheres were found. The material had to be transported from quarries hundreds of miles away, and then shaped, polished, and positioned with unerring accuracy. No inscriptions, no tools, no quarrying evidence nearby, just silence. When analyzed for age, carbon samples embedded in the surrounding soil offered mixed answers. Some dated back over 1,000 years, others to just a few centuries ago. Even within a single sphere, materials yielded conflicting timelines, as if the stones existed outside linear time. And then there were the gravitational anomalies. Objects placed near the larger spheres experienced subtle weight fluctuations, tiny but measurable. The kind of variance that shouldn't exist without massive energy or mass distortion. Some researchers speculated about localized space-time warping. Others dismissed it as instrumental error. But the readings persisted. Were the spheres markers? Instruments? Messages? Their function remains a mystery. But the care with which they were constructed suggests purpose. One possibility is that they served as nodes in a planetary grid, tools for sound or energy or even communication. Another is that they mirrored something larger, a cosmic map cast in stone, designed to be seen not from the Earth, but from the stars. Whatever their origin, the spheres defy the narrative of primitive hands and simple minds. They speak of geometry, astronomy, acoustics, and logistics far beyond the reach of their supposed creators. Today, they sit mostly untouched under the protection of UNESCO, shrouded by vegetation and uncertainty. Their silence is profound, their message incomplete. But perhaps in their perfection, they remind us of something simple, that the universe leaves patterns for those who look closely. And maybe the real question is not who placed them there, but why we stopped listening to what they might be trying to say. In the high desert of southern Peru, etched into the crust of the earth, lies a message so vast it can only be seen from the sky. The Nazca lines, hundreds of geometric patterns, figures, and perfectly straight lines, stretch across more than 170 square miles. For centuries, they were invisible to human eyes, their scale masked by distance. But from above, they come into view. Animals, spirals, trapezoids, and lines so straight they seem laser-drawn across valleys and hills. Officially, they are thought to be ceremonial art, offerings to the gods, perhaps. But beneath that tidy explanation, something more complex emerges. In the 1970s, Dr. Maria Reiche, working with support from NASA, led a series of classified studies. What they found was not just art, but engineering. The longest lines stretch for over 30 miles, maintaining near-perfect linearity despite rugged terrain. The precision requires knowledge of spherical trigonometry, calculations no ancient culture was believed to possess. Surveying techniques this advanced weren't officially developed until the modern era. Even more unsettling were the subsurface features. Using ground-penetrating radar and electromagnetic scanning, researchers uncovered channels beneath the lines, networks of conductive material arranged in specific patterns. The soil itself had been fused into a glass-like substance, requiring temperatures far beyond the capabilities of ancient fire pits or kilns. Some surfaces appeared melted, chemically altered in ways consistent with exposure to directed energy. And the purpose? That's where the theories turned bold. Electromagnetic analysis revealed that many of the geometric patterns resonate at specific radio frequencies. When stimulated, they emit narrow beams of energy detectable from low orbit, suggesting they functioned as navigation beacons or even as a communication system for aerial vehicles. In short, the Nazca lines may not have been art for the gods, but tools for the sky. Support for this grew with satellite imaging, which revealed alignments not just to celestial events, but to subterranean resources. Some lines point directly to underground aquifers. Others trace fault lines or mineral veins, as though mapping the invisible anatomy of the Earth itself. Then came the most startling discovery. Several figures, including massive trapezoids and parallel tracks, contain hardened surfaces and scorched layers resembling landing pads. Areas of ground compacted with force, consistent with vertical descent. Were these runways? If so, then for what? And if these markings weren't designed to be seen from the ground, who were they made for? Official narratives still frame the Nazca lines as cultural expressions. But quietly, under layers of secrecy, they are studied as something else entirely. A system, a network, a forgotten interface, one that required flight to be fully understood. Today, flyovers are tightly controlled. Researchers with access to the full electromagnetic data remain few. Yet the desert speaks. The Nazca lines are more than relics. They are coordinates, blueprints. They suggest a civilization that not only looked to the skies, but understood how to speak with them. We often say the past is written in stone. Here, it's written across an entire landscape, visible only when you rise above it. And the question that lingers isn't just who made them, but whether those they were meant for have already come and gone. Along the banks of the Mureș River in Romania in 1974, construction workers stumbled upon an object buried deep beneath layers of gravel and bones. Nearby were the fossilized remains of mastodons, creatures extinct for over 20,000 years. But nestled among them was something that should not have existed, a wedge-shaped metallic object, 8 inches long and weighing nearly 5 pounds. At first glance, it looked modern, machine-cut, uniform, engineered. But it was aluminum. And aluminum, as far as history tells us, wasn't isolated and refined until the 19th century. This object, dubbed the Aiud artifact, was carbon-dated by organic material around it to be at least 20,000 years old. The paradox was immediate. Aluminum is not found in metallic form in nature. It must be extracted from bauxite using electricity, a process only developed in the past 200 years. Yet here was an aluminum alloy composed of 89% pure aluminum mixed with copper, zinc, lead, and other trace elements in ratios too precise for accidental formation. Dr. Florin Gheorghita of the Romanian Archaeological Commission conducted private metallurgical testing. The results were inexplicable. The alloy's purity and structural characteristics matched aerospace-grade materials developed in the 20th century. The object showed machining marks, smooth, deliberate, cut with high-speed tools unknown in prehistory. But it gets stranger. X-ray crystallography revealed a molecular structure suggesting rapid cooling from extreme heat, something achievable only in advanced furnaces. And the alloy showed no signs of corrosion. Aluminum, when exposed to air, immediately oxidizes. Yet this artifact retained a metallic sheen, as though freshly made. Then came the isotope analysis. The ratios did not match terrestrial aluminum. They aligned instead with theoretical models of material formed in stellar environments, inside stars, or from supernova debris. The object's isotopic fingerprint was, in a word, alien. Its shape was aerodynamic, with structural characteristics implying it was once part of a larger assembly, perhaps a mechanical joint, a stabilizing fin, or a component of propulsion technology. In other words, it was built for function. So how did a modern-looking, precision-machined aluminum object end up buried alongside Ice Age fauna? Some proposed time displacement. Others suggested the remnants of a lost civilization with forgotten technology. More controversial theories pointed to contact, an artifact not of earthly origin, left behind or lost during some past visitation. Whichever theory you choose, the artifact remained unexplained. Shortly after its discovery, it was transferred to the Romanian National Institute of Archaeology. There, it was quietly archived, officially labeled as modern contamination, despite the carbon dating and metallurgical anomalies. It remains sealed from public access. Perhaps because it asks a question we're not ready to face. What if our industrial age isn't the first? What if others came before, advancing, collapsing, leaving behind pieces of their brilliance in places we least expect? Or perhaps it wasn't ours at all. In a world where metal is born from stars and shaped by unseen hands, what does it mean to hold a fragment that exists outside of time? And what other pieces, buried in gravel or locked in vaults, still wait to be seen for what they truly are? In the icy soil of Russia's Kaluga region, during a 1998 geological survey, researchers discovered a puzzle embedded in stone, smaller than a grain of rice, and infinitely more troubling. It was a screw. A microscopic spiral of tungsten, no more than a millimeter in length, locked inside a rock formation dated to the Carboniferous period, roughly 300 million years ago. That's long before birds, mammals, or even flowers existed, long before humanity. The rock had not been disturbed. It had formed naturally, which meant the object inside it predated complex life on Earth. And yet this tiny artifact bore unmistakable signs of intelligent manufacture. Viewed under electron microscopy, the tungsten spiral revealed uniform threading, perfectly spaced grooves, and geometric precision that exceeded what even our best modern tools could produce. The screw's thread pitch and diameter followed ratios known only through advanced engineering. Tungsten, with a melting point of over 3,400 degrees Celsius, is one of the hardest metals to shape, requiring high-tech machining even today. Yet here it was, a nanoscale component built with a precision that implied not just intelligent design, but atomic-level manufacturing. Dr. Yuri Golubev of the Russian Academy of Sciences led a classified analysis. His team confirmed the object wasn't a fossil or natural formation. It was machined, purposeful, a fragment of something once mechanical. More startling were its isotopic properties. Tungsten found on Earth adheres to predictable patterns of isotope distribution. But this sample didn't. Its isotopic signature aligned with models for elements forged in supernovae, suggesting it originated not from our planet, but from the stars. And it wasn't alone. Other such spirals, identical in form, have surfaced in different parts of the world, embedded in stones just as ancient. All of them too small to be seen without aid. All of them defying explanation. What could they be? Some theorize they were part of a monitoring system, nanotechnological devices seeded throughout the Earth's crust, designed to observe or interact with life over geological timescales. Others believe they are remnants of an ancient infrastructure, technology from a civilization lost so far in the past that even fossils of their existence have turned to dust. Electron diffraction analysis showed crystalline patterns inconsistent with any tungsten alloy known to science. The molecular arrangement was not random. It was controlled, patterned, like circuitry written at the atomic level. The implications are staggering. To build a tungsten screw at such a microscopic scale would require tools that don't exist, not even in our most advanced nanofabrication labs. The energy required, the calculations, the material science, it all points to a level of sophistication centuries, perhaps millennia beyond us. And yet the screw was there, encased in stone, waiting. It now resides in a restricted vault at the Moscow Institute of Paleontology. Scientists with clearance continue to study it, though progress is slow. Because this isn't just an out-of-place artifact, it's a message, a reminder that history is not linear, that progress is not always upward, that intelligence, wherever it arises, leaves traces, small, enduring, undeniable. And in the spiral of this screw, there is a quiet question. What else has been left behind, too small for us to notice, or too uncomfortable to believe? In 1996, deep within a South African mine, workers unearthed a sphere unlike anything catalogued in geology or industry. It was metallic, roughly 4 inches in diameter, with 3 parallel grooves etched around its equator. It looked manufactured, too symmetrical, too deliberate to be natural. But the real astonishment came when the sphere was placed on display. It began to rotate, slowly, gently, without any external force. Every 128 hours, it would complete a full rotation on its axis. No vibrations, no power source. Encased in a glass case, untouched by hands or machines, it turned as if guided by something unseen. Sensors detected faint electromagnetic fields radiating from its core, fluctuating in patterns too complex to be noise. It became known as the living metal sphere. Dr. Roelof Marx, a physicist from the University of the Witwatersrand, was granted limited access. His team discovered that the sphere was far older than any known human artifact. The rock surrounding it dated to 2.8 billion years ago, before the emergence of multicellular life. And yet, the sphere responded to proximity. When people entered the room, its electromagnetic readings shifted. When the room emptied, the field calmed. More tests followed. Attempts to drill into the sphere failed. Cutting tools were repelled. When scratches were somehow made, they healed, vanishing in hours. The material repaired itself at a molecular level, mimicking living tissue. No known alloy behaves this way. X-ray scans revealed internal complexity, layered structures, some less than a nanometer thick, arranged in repeating patterns. It was not a solid object. It was a machine, one operating at scales smaller than virus particles, containing mechanisms that defied even the vocabulary of modern engineering. Its composition added another layer of mystery. The metals used don't exist in nature. Some isotopes were stable versions of elements that should decay rapidly. Others showed properties theorized only in particle physics, materials formed under conditions found in the cores of stars. And there was more. Researchers detected faint digital signals, complex patterned pulses resembling code. Attempts to decipher them failed. The mathematics didn't match any known system of computation or language, but the patterns were real, intentional. Evidence of intelligence woven into metal and time. The sphere, it seemed, was not just a relic. It was active, alive, in a sense we don't yet comprehend. Was it observing? Listening? Waiting? Some theorized it was a probe, others a storage device. A time capsule sent not to be opened, but simply to endure. Designed to outlast the rise and fall of species. Built not for speed or visibility, but permanence. It now resides in a high-security research facility in Pretoria under constant monitoring. Still spinning, still silent, still unread. And yet its presence forces a question into the open. If intelligence has touched Earth in ages long before us, would we even recognize it? Or would it be mistaken for a stone, buried and forgotten until it moved? The living metal sphere challenges not just science, but imagination. It hints at a universe where machines don't blink or whir, but pulse quietly, where intelligence doesn't shine, but waits. In the stillness of its spin, a message lingers. Perhaps not all life breathes, not all memory fades, not all watchers sleep. There are some discoveries that don't just raise eyebrows, they unravel assumptions. In July of 1947, the Roswell crash brought with it a mystery that birthed legends. But as we've seen, that was only the beginning. Across continents and centuries, artifacts have emerged that seem to speak the same silent language, of knowledge that doesn't fit, of technologies that shouldn't exist, of intelligence that may not be human. Each object, metal, stone, crystal, or gear, is a page in a hidden book. And the final entry in this strange chapter brings us back to the skies. The concept of flight, of beings visiting from elsewhere, has often been relegated to mythology. Yet one artifact challenges even our most careful skepticism. A detailed bronze map from Tibet, long ignored, even in its homeland, that appears to chart not land masses, but orbital paths. Found in a secluded monastery, the map displays concentric rings with etched paths resembling planetary orbits. Not only that, it depicts smaller objects, spheres aligned in elliptical patterns. When analyzed by astrophysicist Dr. Jahan Lay, under classified collaboration with international agencies, the orbits matched not just the planets in our solar system, but near-Earth asteroids and satellites discovered only in recent decades. The implications were immediate and unsettling. Was this an ancient record of the sky, or a map used for navigation? Hidden within the map were copper discs, thin, precise, inscribed with text in a forgotten dialect. Using spectral analysis and digital modeling, researchers decoded fragments of what appeared to be coordinates, fuel ratios, and navigational protocols based on gravitational slingshots, techniques modern space agencies now use to save fuel during planetary flybys. But the technology implied in these scripts required more than theoretical knowledge. It required practice, experience. And then came the most startling revelation. When the copper discs were arranged in a certain pattern, they generated low-frequency electromagnetic pulses. Not random, but patterned, timed, spaced, mathematically precise. The signals resembled those emitted by long-range beacons or deep space communication arrays. This artifact, now referred to as the orbital codex, suggests that someone, at some point in Earth's deep history, possessed a detailed understanding of orbital mechanics and interplanetary navigation. Not guesswork, mastery. And once again, the fingerprints are familiar. Advanced metallurgy, non-terrestrial isotopic ratios, inscriptions that speak of mathematical relationships unknown to the age in which they were supposedly made. Why does this pattern repeat? Why do so many of these objects show knowledge that our species only began to rediscover in the last century? What if history isn't a straight line? What if Earth has been a host, not just to evolving species, but to visitors, observers, engineers of knowledge? Perhaps these artifacts weren't left behind by mistake. Perhaps they were intended as seeds, clues, or even warnings. Today, the orbital codex is stored in a joint facility monitored by multiple nations. It's studied not as art or relic, but as data, a fragment of a story that remains incomplete. And the deeper we look into these mysteries, the clearer the silence becomes. Not the silence of absence, but the quiet of restraint. As if someone, somewhere, is waiting for us to catch up. And perhaps in the scattered remnants of impossible technology, they left behind one final test. Will we ignore the unknown, or will we dare to understand it? Across decades and continents, each artifact we've examined has carried with it a gravity, a weight not just of material, but of implication. But when viewed together, something more begins to emerge. A pattern, a rhythm, not of isolated anomalies, but of intention. Each object, etched, forged, carved, or assembled, seems to be part of something larger. Like words in a forgotten language scattered across time, they tell a story. That story begins not with us, but with presence, an intelligence that was here before we could name it, perhaps before we even existed, an intelligence that left behind fragments not as declarations, but as invitations. From memory metals that defy our understanding of matter, to stone discs inscribed with galactic navigation, to mechanisms that blend clockwork with quantum states, each artifact is both tool and testimony, not proof of a conspiracy, but evidence of a greater context. And still, the silence holds. Because every time one of these artifacts is uncovered, a familiar cycle begins. Official explanations emerge. Objects are relocated to secure storage. Research is classified. Access is denied. And soon, the artifact vanishes from public view, its mystery diluted by doubt. Why? Perhaps because they force us to confront uncomfortable truths. That our civilization may not be the first, that knowledge can be lost as easily as it is gained. That the line between science and myth is thinner than we think, and perhaps most provocatively, that we have never been alone. Each of these objects suggests a past shaped not only by human hands, but by a presence more advanced, more enduring, and far more elusive than we are prepared to accept. They may be relics of contact, of guidance, of observation. They may be remnants of visitors who came not to conquer, but to plant ideas, technologies, warnings, or perhaps they were simply here to watch. These artifacts, then, are not secrets to be feared, but questions to be lived with. What if the true purpose of these objects is not to shock us, but to awaken us? What if they are the scaffolding of a larger story, one that stretches across millennia, across species, across stars? The suppression, too, follows a pattern. Governments classify. Institutions silence. And the deeper the mystery, the tighter the grip. But despite that, the artifacts persist. Quietly. Patiently. Because you cannot unwrite what has already been carved into stone, or spun into crystal, or etched into the molecular structure of a strange, untouchable metal. And so we arrive here at the edge of understanding with a question not of proof, but of readiness. Are we ready to see history not as a ladder, but as a spiral? Are we ready to see technology not as a linear march, but as a memory? One that returns, again and again, when the world is quiet enough to notice? The answers may not lie in vaults or laboratories. They may lie in how we choose to look. Because in the end, these artifacts are not just about the past. They are about us, about what we fear, what we forget, and what we are finally ready to remember. A metal fragment recovered from a desert crash. A skull carved from crystal that responds to thought. A stone sphere that hums when no one is listening. These are not just relics. They are reflections of ourselves, our assumptions, and the blind spots in our understanding of time. Over the course of this journey, we've uncovered evidence that challenges the core of what we believe about history. artifacts that seem impossibly advanced, materials that shouldn't exist, technologies that predate our technological age. Each one carefully studied, quietly classified, and removed from public knowledge. But the truth is not just hidden in vaults or buried beneath official denial. It's buried in the way we think, in our need for neat timelines, for singular origins, for comfort in the idea that we are the pinnacle of progress. Yet these objects tell a different story, a story of recurrence, of forgotten knowledge, of something, someone that came before. We don't know if these artifacts were gifts or accidents, whether they were signs of contact or the remnants of a long-lost human epoch. We don't know if the intelligence behind them was terrestrial or not. But we do know they exist, and we know they don't fit. That alone should matter, because in their impossibility, these artifacts offer a mirror. They show us how much we don't know, how much we may have forgotten, and how often we mistake silence for absence. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't who left these artifacts behind, but why we've spent so long pretending they don't matter. Why, when faced with evidence that history might be far richer and stranger than we ever imagined, we look away. But maybe that's changing. Maybe the questions are finally growing louder than the answers. Maybe the cracks in our certainty are becoming windows. So we're left with this, not fear, not revelation, but wonder. A wonder that asks, what if the past is deeper than we thought? What if knowledge is not a straight road, but a circle? What if the universe is more inhabited, more ancient, and more curious than we ever dared to believe? The artifacts remain, waiting, not for validation, but for understanding. And for those willing to ask the hardest question of all, if we are not the first, who came before? And what did they leave behind for us to find when we were finally ready to remember?